Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Andrew Townsend. I'm with eLearning Brothers. Today's session is going to be about turning a culture of learning into business as usual. It's going to be a really exciting topic, and we brought in some really special guests to talk to us about this. This session will be recorded. We'll get a copy of it emailed out to everybody who has registered, and we will also be posting this on our blog later in the week. So if you'd like to reference it later and you can't find it, you'll always be able to find it at elearningbrothers.com. If you have questions during the session, please do use that questions panel in the GoToWebinar control panel there on the side, and we'll get to as many of those questions as we can. And hopefully we'll also be asking some questions of you, and you can put your answers in that same panel to participate in the conversation. All right, so to talk to us today, we have Mark Rivera, a learning and development professional currently working for Lloyd's of London, and Trent Howell, the Vice President of Marketing here at eLearning Brothers. Thank you both of us for joining, and I'll go ahead, without any further ado, turn the time over to Trent and Mark.
Fantastic. Thanks, Andrew. It's great to be on here. We do have a typical intro slide that I like to throw in there, even though you can see our faces in the video boxes here. I've been on with eLearning Brothers, joined last year, and it's been fantastic. I love all the things we have to offer. And I'm glad to have Mark Rivera on, that I have known for a number of years, and he's been a learning development professional in a lot of capacities. So Mark, I'll give you just a quick couple of minutes to tell us about yourself.
Okay, yeah, I've been working formally in learning and development, talent development for 22 years, give or take. Now, worked in various roles, but mostly management leadership roles. Had mostly full-time roles in different industries, from construction. I've worked with the FTSE in the City of London. I've worked with the Stock Exchange, Thomson Reuters, Jane's Information, insurance, telecommunications with Deutsche Telekom. So like a real variety of experiences.
Yeah, and you've seen a lot. Yeah, you've seen a lot of ways to implement learning and across the spectrum, which is great.
Yes,
so in those 20 years that you've spent, what have you seen has changed over those last 2 decades in learning?
You know, it's well, a lot. I think a move away from the traditional, what we call chalk and talk, is probably the big one. I think the time is at a premium. So the move towards more bite-sized learning, and also a variety of opportunities of how we attract people to learning, and how we get the learning to them, whether it's PDFs or videos or classes or e-learning, just having a lot more variety that talks to different learning styles, which is really, really important, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of learning styles.
Yeah, and moving to more of a just-in-time response, as opposed to being on a waiting list and having to wait for a course to be available. There's a lot more flexibility now. I think people are taking learning on in all kinds of ways. So it's a challenge, but also really exciting industry to be in right now, profession to be in, I'd say.
Yeah, technology is driving so many changes across the board, and I think in this aspect, it's really helped and really augmented.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So one of the 2 things that we want to talk about today is we're going to talk about when we hear culture of learning, we want to talk about, okay, what is the ideal when we refer to culture of learning, and how do we get there? Because studies have shown, at least studies that we've read, said that 31% of organizations have a culture of learning. And I think what they mean by that is a positive culture of learning, because as we'll get into, I think we all have some cultures. So when we talk about culture as far as an organization goes, when we think about company culture, here's a couple of pictures from some recent activities here at eLearning Brothers. We talk about company culture. What are some things that typically come to mind when you hear someone talking about their company culture?
Well, you know, there's lots of elements to this, but I mean, certainly when it comes to learning and development, my experience in a lot of different organizations is that team culture actually trumps everything, and then the wraparound culture of organizations matters. And Marcus Buckingham has recently been talking about this. He's a well-renowned thought leader in this space. And he made a really, really good point, which is that people really, they'll stay with a team before they decide to leave a company. It's a team experience. So one of the things certainly we're doing at Lloyd's and we're trying to promote is and to help managers and employees to build learning in their teams, and rather than worry for a more strategic approach, and because that's where you make it real on a day-to-day basis, and that's the experience where you can actually use that the environment you're in to innovate, to collaborate, to share learning experiences far more readily than wait for huge company initiatives. But that's really what I think about, certainly, and certainly what I've seen the improvement is when you have and prepare, particularly managers and leaders, to be coaches and mentors to drive a learning culture as part of delivery. So linked to delivery and strategy.
Yeah, I think that is a good point because, when we talk about a company culture of talking about, what their work hours are like or their communication styles with each other, but it really comes down to the team of who the people you're working with really on a regular basis, day to day, I think is part of it. And then you touched on bringing it into the culture of learning. And this is different than that 31% I talked about earlier, because everybody's going to have a culture of learning. The question is it positive or is it negative? Because you're going to learn something. I was with a company that talked about how much they valued learning. However, they wanted you to do your learning on your own time. It was always after hours. Yeah, we want you to take these courses. We wanted you to do this, but we don't want you to do it during office hours. So they had a culture of learning, but it was not what I would consider a positive culture. I mean, what kind of things have you seen?
Yeah, it's pretty similar. I mean, there's a real challenge, I think, more now than ever, for companies to really invest by way of allowing people to have time to learn. It's not so much about spend, I don't think. That's always an issue because budgets are limited, but it's actually building learning into expectations of performance and part of the culture. It's helping managers and leaders to understand that if people can invest in discussions around learning and attending learning, in on-the-job learning particularly, and that reverberates through the work experience of the team and the individuals, that becomes an investment that pays back in improved performance, higher engagement, motivation. All those things tend to increase when it becomes part of the lifeblood, the heartbeat of how we work. When it's seen as an expense, when it's seen as something that's to the side of performance, it's really problematic. And certainly in learning and development, we're fighting an uphill battle when that's the environment. And so a lot of certainly my experience and the teams I work with, our jobs is a lot to do with helping win hearts and minds of managers and leaders, particularly to help them realize the value and the return on a higher performance if they create and give permission and set the tone for the kind of cultures that's really required to have learning as part of the whole experience.
Yeah, I do like that, as you mentioned, tone, because it's not necessarily what we're spending or what we're investing or putting in it, but just the tone and the vibes we get off and what we reward is part of that. So I'd like to actually pop up a poll now before we dive into this to see what type we've got out there in the audience. But Andrew, if we can launch that poll and essentially ask from your perspective, looking at your organization, do you feel like it is a positive learning culture? As we've just talked about this, how would you rate that if you see a positive learning culture in your organization?
And you can click directly on the screen to participate in this poll. So just let us know, where do you stand? Where do you predict the results are going to be, Trent?
That's a good question. I don't want to influence people putting in there, but I actually think that it's higher than what some studies have said. I think there's aspects of it that are very positive, and I think we've seen seen trends, at least with customers that we've been dealing with, that we're seeing, more of a trend towards, we're doing a lot of good things. So I think it's going to be more favorable than not.
All right, great. So I'll go ahead and close the poll and put it up here on screen so you guys can see the results. So 55% of the audience said yes, they feel their organization has a positive learning culture, and 45 said no. So it's almost a 50-50, but not quite. Definitely more of a yes. And I wonder if there may be some of those no's where the culture might be a yes, but the execution is a no, and so it's hard to say yes if that's the case.
That's true. What do you think, Mark? Is that these surprising results to you, or?
It's not. I think it's probably a little higher on the yes side, but I think it's probably. I would suspect this audience is buying into it, and anyway, so I would expect that. I mean, I wonder what the results would be for millennials who are coming into organizations. I suspect it would be lower, depending on the organization, of course. But certainly my experience is that there's a lot of talk in senior teams and organizations, well-meaning talk about learning and the importance of learning. But often the culture doesn't necessarily reflect it in the reality of the day-to-day. And also it's a question of helping people understand what learning culture actually is. Learning culture is not just about attending courses or spending money on me. It's not about that. And often that's the limited view that's seen in organizations. And I've seen it numerous times.
Well, let's dive into exactly that then. And we will see as we get further along here. But first, on the bad side, what are some of the impacts for those on the negative side, what are some things that you can experience with having a bad learning culture?
Well, I mean, I'll speak about the millennials more particularly, and the younger generations. I mean, you will experience leavers for sure. I think it really hits retention in a big way. They're looking for this. They're looking for that environment, and they're looking for the flexibility of learning in multiple ways, according to different styles and tools and what have you. I think that magical word of engagement tends to decrease when the learning culture bats against it. You certainly get, I think you get lower performance. It's harder to achieve high performance because a learning environment inextricably supports high performance. It's absolutely linked when the conversations are there, when learning is recognized on the job and it's brought to team meetings and it's constantly on the agenda. It does have an impact, and it raises motivation. Apathy there. Yeah, absolutely. These are easily. And then if the high performance isn't achieved, then you're going to lose customers. So it has all those impacts for sure.
Yeah, especially if you get disengagement or apathy on your customer service team. Yeah, a lot of those things are going to have a play into that. And so we've found as well with studies that 79% of the learning happens outside of the learning and development function or functional role. Mm-hmm. We're talking a lot on this, and we have a lot of people coming to the webinar in these roles, mm-hmm. and that's their job to focus on this. But I think we realize that as much as we do, there's learning that happens outside of that function, which, as you mentioned previously about the 70-20-10. How does that play into?
Yeah, it's a tough one, I think, because old habits die hard. I think there's a lot of value in trying to look at a holistic learning experience and to try to move away. I mean, the 70-20-10 model is not fixed, of course. It's rough numbers, but it's a fairly substantial part of our learning is day to day, on the job, very experiential in the now. What doesn't happen so much, because when you mention that to people, of course they say, "Oh, of course it does," but what doesn't happen is actually conversations about that on the job learning. It's just accepted as just part of what goes on as part of work. but rather than bringing it into team meetings or actually pointing out something or having discussions in the moment about what was learned and how to embed that learning. And so that's where the culture work comes in. It's helping managers and employees to understand that needs to be part of the vibrant conversations that happen day to day. As we start to build that into the regular one-to-ones, into team discussions, into conversations on in the team, then it starts to become a real living thing. And that's part of the challenge, is to really spend more time and effort focusing on those things, pointing them out, discussing them, and then leveraging how the talent and the motivation and the recognition of these learning opportunities to raise performance and to continue to champion more and more of this kind of focus on the non-official formal learning stuff.
So would you recommend, so even this, like we've got a few things up of where people learn, and you've talked previously about the leaders having conversations, one-on-one conversations. So for example, if you've got an employee that you send off to a conference or that has attended a webinar or listened to some podcasts, do you encourage managers to inquire about that or follow up on it, or what would be a good method?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to use a very simple model. It's I call it the 30, 60, 90 for lack of any other.
Throw some numbers at it.
Yeah, basically, it's really about part of my mantra with my stakeholders is that we can provide all the training we want and all the in however it's delivered, but what really matters is what happens when they come back to the job. How are they applying the learning? What are they doing to raise performance consistently? How are they sharing that learning with their contacts, with their colleagues when they collaborate? How are they making sure it becomes part of how performance goes forward? So I always recommend that managers follow that basic model that I think we're all familiar with, the importance of following up with people after a learning experience, whatever that was. If it was a relatively key experience, to follow up fairly soonish after that experience to just agree, okay, what was taken away from that? How are you going to use it? And then maybe a 30, 60, and 90 days, you check back with them and agree some actions. And also managers and leaders should be walking side by side saying, how can I help you to embed that learning to raise your performance? So it's keeping it on the agenda all the time. So those post-learning experience conversations are absolutely vital. And if it doesn't happen, the likelihood of retention, let alone good application and consistent high performance, is pretty low.
So we have a quick question that has jumped in here. For those of us unfamiliar, can you give us a quick rundown of this 70-20-10 and maybe some of its background, when it kind of came to fruition, when people started noticing this?
Yeah, I think it's been around for a while, if I'm honest. I would say it's easily around 10 years now. And there's been other variations of this model. But the simplicity of it is that the research was showing that roughly 70% of our learning is on the job. And that involves, these are kind of examples, but a lot of it's about learning by doing, team meetings, internal problem solving, or it could be a variety of things. It could be what in the UK we call sit by Nelly, teaching someone how to do something. But roughly 70% of the learning involves those kind of day-to-day things that we tend to just take for granted. The 20% really focuses on working directly through another individual who gives you a bit more direct support, so through coaching or mentoring. It could be a colleague, it could be a member of the team. Often it's someone's manager or leader, but not exclusively that. And then the 10% tends to be around the actual more formal stuff where we're spending budget. So it'll be courses, it'll be e-learning, it'll be events. It'll be a variety of those kind of things, but generally speaking, it's more formalized. There's budget spent on it. There's more metrics around it. And that tends to be the reality. I mean, mileage varies accordingly. If you have a new starter, then their more formal stuff is going to be larger, and you would expect that. But usually as people get into their role, it tends to move more or less around these numbers. I haven't yet met anybody who really disputes it as a rough number. It'll flex, but I'd say it pretty much still stands up from what I can tell.
So yeah, the way to pull it out is if most of our learning is happening at that on the job, that's where it comes back to the manager and being able to have that just an open discussion about what you learned, what you took away from it, and how you're going to apply it. And as you mentioned, there 30, 60, 90, that we remember to come back to it and say, okay, from what you told me 30 days ago, what have you implemented? What have you taken away from it? Which are
I mean, certainly a lot of time in my career I've spent coaching managers and leaders around how to be a learning leader. And I think, there's an argument that says that should be one of the key deliverables for talent development, to constantly be educating and coaching and mentoring leaders, stakeholders around the skills of being a learning leader. And that involves all of those things.
So teaching learning skills related to how to teach, learn. So we've talked about a few things. We've hit on a few of these points as well, but what do we consider an ideal positive learning culture? We've got a few points that we can talk about here.
Sure.
I'll bring a couple up at a time as well, so you can tell us a little bit about how those feed into having a good learning culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the first one is really, really critical. I've been in every organization I've worked in every industry I've worked in. There's always this problem about helping employees to understand the linkage between learning events, how we train people, coach, whatever, when learning takes place, and how it links to strategy, business deliverables, team deliverables, all of that. Often it's almost seen as a separate issue. And I think that's where it falls down. It's what's really valuable and where the payoff comes is when learning discussions and plans are put in place and conversations are happening between one-to-ones with managers, that learning is seen to be linked to what we're working on, what the objectives are for the team, what the business strategic objectives are, so that they're seen as a contribution and a part to play that learning plays is really vital to making the success of the organization. And lo and behold, the employee benefits because they get career stretch out of it and career learning out of it. So everybody wins. But I think connecting that is actually quite motivational, and it helps to build engagement to the organizations. I think that's probably one of the really critical pieces here.
And it helps them feel valued. Like, okay, I can see a connection of what I am, how I'm developing, and how that's going to help the company improve.
Yeah. Because people. I mean, again, motivational research has shown that people want to feel they're doing something meaningful and contributing to something in an organization that's actually making a difference. And that's a clear way of how to have those conversations.
Very good.
Okay. The values that affirm learning is important. It's really about, you can talk, and one of the things, again, that gets neglected, we will often focus on technical learning. Talking about behavioral learning, again, is the demonstrable connection to behaviors. And behaviors ultimately is the game changer, because we hire people for their technical skills. And where learning really, really comes into its own is around the behavioral stuff, which tends to link, funny enough, to higher performance. Teams that have higher performance tend to have the edge in terms of using those effective behaviors in terms of the way they deliver, the way they interact, the way they innovate, and it adds that extra higher level of value. So it's really, and it ultimately speaks to organizations' values. Okay, next one, 6. It's part of a good learning environment is encouraging people to go out and seek learning. When managers and leaders, and I've been fortunate enough to work with some who do this, they build it into performance. They actually build it into performance measures. They build it into expectations that their employees are expected to go out and learn and bring stuff back into the team, into the organization. So it's actually giving a rationale and a connection to performance that where learning all of a sudden becomes much more meaningful rather than almost incidental.
Yeah, and as you said earlier as well, how do we encourage them to share it with others, and bringing up in team meetings can help be part of that as well.
Mm. Okay, an atmosphere in which learning is so ingrained. I mean, the goal really is where learning is just a natural part of the ecosystem. and part of the regular conversations and dialogue. So one of the things I'm doing with the HR team at Lloyd's of London is I'm doing weekly learning emails and covering a lot with resources, lots of different learning tips, and getting them to exchange and have conversations about what's coming in 2020 and forward, new changes in technology and changes in business. So we're trying to just get it on the agenda all the time. And so that it becomes just much more of a natural thing that people are very comfortable and know that there's huge value for everybody if we constantly are talking about learning and what are we doing with it.
Very good. That's fantastic. I wanted to pull up a quote that I came across that is actually a number of years old, as you can see from the date now that we've hit 2020, but I still really like this because it talks to the fact that, yeah, if you're doing it just out of compliance, then you're not going to get that at all. The culture is people are learning because they want to. And the things you just talked about with the ideal of tying it to the overall values of the company and the objectives and the strategies of the company, those are reasons why people are going to want to learn. And I love hearing that as well. So one of the things we talked about at the start, when you were saying what you've seen changed over those 20 years, we've talked about blended learning and ways we're encapsulating learning. How does blended learning and the mix of learning styles play a role in creating a learning culture?
Well, I think in a couple of ways. I think a big driver in blended learning and just-in-time learning and the variety that's out there now, it's being driven by particularly the millennials. I say there's an expectation there. And I mean, a lot of the universities and the schools are moving to those kind of models in any case. So they're coming into organizations expecting this availability of just-in-time stuff, learning via an app on their phone or whatever it is. And it allows us to keep a very close eye on different learning styles and the time limitations people have in the way they want to learn. So rather than thinking that we're doing it to people, it's a reflection of we're trying to do it with them and to serve them by providing the variety and providing the options so that they can then choose the way that they can learn best, and we can help to understand that. So there's more and more of a conversation and consulting that needs to take place from the learning and development side of things, in terms of we're digging out what are the needs, and let's understand how people will learn and what they would prefer and how they want to prefer to learn, so that we can try to accommodate these in as broad a spectrum as possible. And as we do that, we're going to get much more engagement in learning.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, it's pulling it all together in those different learning styles. We're going to learn differently, which makes it tough on the measurement side because
it does. Yeah.
But that's another webinar for a different day.
Well, it's a nice problem to have in a sense, so I'm not too bothered.
Exactly. So since we have a variety of folks on our webinar today in a lot of different roles, one of the things I know you wanted to touch on was how can someone, regardless of where they are, start to impact a positive company culture?
Yeah, I've done some presentations.
The one that you've mentioned a few times about what can leaders do.
Yeah. I mean, I've done some presentations to leaders recently about this, and leaders, strategically, there's I think an imperative for them to be role models ultimately. I mean, if leaders are not seen to be hungry, eager learners, it's hard to sell it through the business. It's a lot tougher. But if there's an authenticity that leaders are prepared to learn regardless of their experience and are always eager to drive learning and live by that and share their learning experiences, it's really, really powerful when they bring that to the table with authenticity and they're seen to be doing that. People will notice that. So I think there's a key role for leaders, but it's not just the leaders, as we discussed. That's the easy bit, if I'm honest. Line managers, yeah, it's line managers. Same again. There's a role model piece there. There's bringing their own learning. I think, and part of that is I think particularly for leaders and managers is to park their egos a bit and have the humility to say, you know what, I'm still learning too, and perhaps learn from their people that work for them. This is where reverse mentoring comes into play as a good example. But I think there's a big part for leaders to be walking the talk on this. If they're not, if it's just talk, it's going to fall flat pretty fast.
Yeah, and then that can be seen through. But I like that point of saying, yeah, park your ego and say, hey, I'm still learning. And a lot of times we bring people onto the team because they have skills that we don't have. We should be upfront and recognize and even vocalize to say, yeah, I don't know that. Help, teach me what you've learned.
Well, there's been a big argument about, particularly in recruitment circles, about the word fit when we're hiring people or we're looking to get project teams together and think about, no, they've got to be the right fit. And there's been a lot of discussion in thought leaders recently around saying, you know what, maybe we need to have people who don't fit so well. And actually, they bring what they bring to the table. And that actually drives more diversity, higher performance, because they don't fit so well, and they're going to ask more questions and they're going to challenge more. But that will build learning and greater learning when we have more diversity in teams like that.
Yeah, that's a good aspect of it. Yeah,
right.
what can all the employees do?
Yeah, that's you and I, right? So, ultimately, and this is a key part of my mantra with leaders and managers is that we have to own our own learning. At the end of the day, we shouldn't have an expectation that organizations are going to develop us or what have you. There's a need to do it. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to or do what we get the learning that we come looking for necessarily. But we can own our learning. We can own our plan. If we sit back and say, develop me, we're just going to get what we get. But actually, if we did our homework and if we actually think about our strengths and look at developing our strengths to even take it to another level, if we are partnering with our managers, and the role of managers and leaders is to partner with individuals to help us to have a sense of where we should be focusing on, what our strengths are, to the kind of learnings that can take place. There's a real role for that. Managers and leaders need to set the tone and say, I expect you to own it. And I'm here to support you. And I want to be more of a coach and mentor where you're coming to me with ideas about learning. So it's important that they set the tone and give permission per se. But I think it's important that employees, all of us, learn to and embrace learning for our own sake and own it. If we own it, we're more likely to find the right kind of things that really will make a difference.
And I like that, share it up the ladder, because likewise, as an employee, I want my boss to think, okay, I'm competent.
Absolutely.
But still be vulnerable enough to say, hey, I want to tell you about some things that I've just learned or that I've discovered. Hey, there's, especially, from a marketing standpoint, there are so many tools and new things that I see coming out in my field that I need to continually be learning. For me to share up the ladder to say, hey, here's something new that I've just discovered. I think that's great to, own your own development there. So from a talent development role.
Yeah. So talent development, stroke L&D teams, individuals. I think the role has changed a lot in this whole space. I like to think that we are moving into much more of a consultative role where we stand alongside our stakeholders. I'm always a bit worried when managers and leaders want to push everything on top of L&D and talent development. We're there to support. We should be acting as value-added advisors, and I find that really works well. There's a bit of hearts and minds to sell that to line managers sometimes, because sometimes they treat L&D or talent development as order takers, and that's not the way it should be. It really needs to be led by leaders and managers. So there's an education piece to help that we need to be helping leaders and managers to understand that they should be leading. And they should be setting the tone, and they should be then partnering with us to help them be able to create these kind of environment where it really, really happens. We're not there to create the environment by ourselves. Absolutely not. We're there, should be there as trusted advisors to support and help their thinking so that they can focus in the right way and lead it themselves. And then we can go on and do other things.
Very good. And I know I've come up with a lot of tips along. This may be kind of just a recap on a number of things because we've touched base. But what are some ways, because we've talked already about roles and ways they can implement this, and we'll pull up a number of other ways that that we can just do to make it a way of life or business as usual in our organization. So if you'd like to cover a few other kind of tips of what other, you've already mentioned even as well about the hiring, maybe we get some people that don't necessarily fit, but there's a few ideas here.
Yeah, I think it's part of this, I would say, is to have this kind of conversation with management teams and ask them the question, how can we create a culture? What do you need? What do you want to see? I mean, I've done that with some teams where I've actually asked the team to say, okay, let's talk to your manager now. Okay, what do you want to see in a culture? Then let's get your manager's view. So it's things like this. I mean, don't treat training as let's get away from the word training. Let's use learning. Let's use development, because training sounds so linear. Let's think about it as part of an ecosystem of learning experiences and how the cumulative value of all of these seemingly disconnected pieces actually go into the whole piece of higher performance. Through effective coaching particularly, it's helping people to find their own answers. So good coaching training that doesn't necessarily direct people, but actually asks people questions and helping them to discover the answers for themselves. So there's training and coaching in there. Curiosity really matters. Being prepared to be innovative, I think, to challenge each other as to find new ways or different ways of learning. I think coaching, train managers to coach. I would put a stroke and say mentoring as well, because there's room for both. I think managers need to play much more of a role like that. I think, reward continuous improvement. I would add to that recognition of learning, recognition of those who share learning. I think one of the foundational pieces is to have really effective one-to-ones with employees and managers as an ongoing thing. I'm a big fan of the Adobe model. They call it a check-in. If you go to Adobe's website, they even have collateral that they are freely offering, where they talk about a model of one-to-ones, which it gets away from the traditional, let's just do a checklist of what you're working on. It has three parts to it. So, one part, the first part is basically, let's talk about how you're doing against your objectives and how I can help you. And then it moves into the second part where you're exchanging feedback about performance, but about how you can help and what you need from your employee. And then the third part is about development and learning and what you're doing with it, implementation, what else you need, how can I support you in your learning. So it's a much more vibrant one-to-one. And the idea is to do that on a very regular basis, so that if you have regular one-to-ones using that more framework or something similar, where you're talking about a wider remit of topics over, let's say, half an hour to an hour, then by the end of the year, you've already had some really valuable conversations and exchange of feedback, and you're constantly going back to the well to talk about learning. And that's the thing. Too many companies, even now, leave learning discussions to mid-years or end of years. But Adobe said, well, hang on a minute. No, let's talk about this all the time, because actually there's huge value, and especially when we take those lessons and we use them in the moment or as close to real time as possible. There's so much more power there. So I think that it's transforming the way we have one-to-ones is a big deal.
Yeah, those are fantastic ways as well. And you've mentioned leading by example as well as part of all of this. Mm-hmm. As we're nearing the end of this as well, I know we'll have some, we'll look for some questions here in a minute, but you'd also want to talk about what can suppliers as well do? How can they impact a learning culture?
I think, and I've seen it start to happen, which is useful. I think suppliers need to be much more consultative rather than on the sell. It's obvious that you're there to sell, and that's fine. But I think it's about what added value can you provide through consultancy as part of the package of what people are buying. I think there's more added value there when you're starting to understand the needs of the client organizations and the challenges that managers have in being able to use the tools or the solutions or whatever you're selling. When you have a sense of the culture, when you have a sense of the challenges involved, then you can have a different kind of conversation, which talks to the deeper needs. And once you start to get into that territory, then all of a sudden it changes the relationship from a supplier and a customer to much more of a consultative, an exchange of learning as well. I think that's really the way to go, is to become more of a partner with talent development and with key stakeholders. I think that's really key to go much more into consulting. And then the natural part will evolve into getting to, is the solution right? Does it meet the needs? Does it solve the problems? Does it address what needs to be addressed? So it's going to much more consultative selling approach, really. So understanding the business drivers, the culture, where the organization is going, and provide resources not just at the senior level, but which tends to get most of the money. It's actually about thinking about cutting across different levels of organizations, and how when you're providing learning solutions or tools for different levels, then you're going to get engagement across the whole piece. And yeah, I would put communications and marketing support as well. Talent development certainly needs help on the marketing side, certainly is my experience, because we're not marketing experts. So if we can get comms and marketing support, I mean, I'm talking to suppliers right now about a mentoring platform. And one of my criteria is to make sure that they can provide some support in terms of templates or whatever, in terms of being able to help me to market the tool into the organization, into the insurance market.
Yeah, and that goes back to what you talked about that you're doing, is sending out just a weekly communication as well, of doing some communications to keep it regular. Yeah,
I'm starting to see suppliers do more of that kind of thing, which is, I think, really valuable.
Very good. Well, it's been a fantastic conversation, Mark.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
all the tips. I think there's a lot of great insight here. I know those that have joined the webinar are looking for a lot of ideas, because there's always something more we can learn, and we can develop, we can implement, we can do that. And I think the insight that you've had with all the experience has been very valuable. So I appreciate your time in doing that. And
well, I hope you all
I'm going to turn some time back over here to Andrew to check out on what we've got for questions and a little bit of a wrap up. So
we've had a couple people that have volunteered what their organizations are doing and whether they're working or not. So I'll throw out the one that's the most interesting to me. This person says, I get semi-weekly learning emails from my organization with various opportunities, but I feel like there isn't enough time for me to take the class or the course or read the articles or watch the videos, etc. So while they may be providing it, I don't feel that I have the time to take advantage of those opportunities. So what are some of the thoughts on how to overcome that?
Yeah, funny enough, I mean, one of the foundational challenges in all of this is time. And that cuts in all kinds of ways. It's really about, and this goes back to the piece I mentioned about leaders and managers recognizing that they have to kind of allow employees the space to invest in, whether it's reading an article or whatever it is. And that needs to be in the mix of performance expectations. When it's not, when it's seen like, well, you're on your own, it's really problematic. I would always argue that it's worth what I call an adult conversation with our managers, to say, look, I want to learn, because if I can learn, I can grow. And guess what? If I grow, higher performance, I win, you win, team wins. So I need a little time. I need some time to invest in this or that. Can you help me out here? Can we work together to agree that how that will work? I think it's a positive, proactive conversation to have. I'm a big fan of employees raising learning as a positive opportunity rather than something you owe me. I think when it's approached in that way, and from the point of view of, guess what, we win together if we have opportunities to invest in time and learning. I think that's a worthy conversation.
There's another comment that's coming back to company culture, and you had talked about this 30 minutes ago, something like that. You not only need a company culture that supports learning, but individuals also need to commit the time to learn. Nobody has time at work to learn unless you make the time, and that culture accepts that adjustment in the time.
It's the truth. Yeah, absolute truth. I mean, Time is such a huge factor. I hear this on a daily basis. And my response is, well, what are you going to do about it? Ultimately, especially with managers, because they kind of, agree with principle. But I'm saying, if you don't kind of arrange for this and allow people to do it, then they're not going to reap the benefits, and then the performance is not going to start to escalate. So it's like, what if you don't do this? What's the pain, right? So it's the importance of seeing it as an investment of time, which will pay off dividends. It's tough, but we got to keep on it.
Another comment that came in just a few moments ago that maybe some people in the audience misunderstood. So does Adobe have resources that can be accessed?
Last time I checked the website, yeah. If you go on or if you could even Google Adobe check-ins, and it should take you to a page where they have some PDFs that you can use in team meetings to introduce the check-in model, which I think is extremely generous of them. I was very impressed when I saw it. I would like to think it's still there. So it's definitely worth checking out.
All right, we can check that out as well, and if we see that, we can provide a link to that as well.
Yeah.
There's a couple more questions coming in.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on gamification as a way to promote that individual commitment to spending time to learn? And again, I think a lot of the gamification options are going to come down to that culture, and then again, the time that you want to put into building that system.
Yeah. In principle, I don't have an issue with that. I think if it gets engagement and it gets people pulled into it, then I'm all for it. If they buy into it, I would say not everybody's going to buy into it, and we just accept that. If we make it a compliance issue, then I'm always nervous when learning becomes a compliance thing. Yes, we have to have compliance courses, of course, but if everyone has to kind of go through the gamification piece, not everybody is going to buy into it. So as one way of attracting certain members of the audience who will be all over it, I'd say, yeah, do it.
Excellent. And for that Adobe reference, we did put that in the chat. So there's a toolkit section. If you go to the chat section of your GoToWebinar control panel, there's a link there. So we were able to find that and put that there. So if you'd like to grab access to that, and we'll also include that in the email if you can't find the chat right now, but we put that information in there. It doesn't look like there's any other questions that we'll take at this time.
Okay.
So I'll turn the time back over to you, Trent.
All right. Fantastic. I did want to just do a quick wrap up. Many of you that are on the webinar are familiar with a lot of services that we offer at eLearning Brothers. We have a whole range of solutions that we can help and help you build that culture, whether it be something that you're building on your own, whether you need a lot of templates or assets to build your own training, whether you're looking for a partner to help you build some custom training and development, or if you're just looking to grab some courses that are already prepared and you just want to grab them off the shelf and go. Likewise, learning games and also tools that we have available for an LMS and others that we have available. So a reminder of that, we do have as well many that can help in consulting with whatever you need, or if you'd like to take a demo of some of those courses that we have available or custom, go ahead and hit our website and fill out the form and send it to us, and we'll get a call scheduled with you. And most of all, Mark, I want to give you a big thumbs up, and I thank you again for taking the time to do that. It's nice to chat with somebody across the pond, per se.
Yeah. From rainy London today, yeah.
Is it nice and rainy?
Oh, it was, yeah, typical.
Always there. Well, we've got a skiff of snow, so we still remember winter here. So thank you very much. I appreciate everybody taking the time today. Hopefully it's been very helpful and you've gotten some tips. And likewise, for those that are on the webinar, if you have some other suggestions or tips of good experiences that you'd have, we'd always welcome those. So share those with us. And on our social media accounts, you can share some of those examples of what you've seen is working well. And hopefully we can all help each other raise the bar a little bit more and continue to help employees and all of us learn and develop further. So thanks a bunch and have a great day.
Thanks very much. See you then.